Hey there, fellow classic comic collectors. As always, I'm Scott Harris King, and today we did it! We did it, and by we, I mean you. I didn't really do anything other than talking to my phone, but you guys have allowed us to hit 300 subscribers, so I want to thank everybody so much. The support you guys are giving me, it's a really amazing and boggling. So thanks for doing that. I feel like this is kind of the cryptocurrency of YouTube channels. It continues to go up and up, even though nobody has any idea why or what function this channel possibly serves. But I, as your comic book living Dogecoin, I appreciate your support, even though I don't understand it. And thanks so much. I really appreciate it. Today we're going to be diving into your questions now, and I did announce the 300 subscriber contest. I also announced the 300 subscriber Ask Me Anything, and so here I am ready to answer all of your questions. I've got a list of all the questions. I'm going to be recording this in chunks as the questions come in. Otherwise, it'll just take too long. So as a result, this may be one of the last videos I record with my long flowing locks. I should have done some Thor cosplay while I had my long hair. This is my pandemic hair. I haven't had my hair cut since before the pandemic, but in a week I'll be fully vaccinated, and to celebrate I'm going to go up and finally get a haircut. So any videos that you see where I still have the long hair, you can tell that I recorded them a while ago, like this one, because by the time this airs, that will be done. Yes, instead of looking like a hobo cosplaying as Alan Moore, I'll just look like myself going forward. So we all have that to look forward to. But for now, let's dive right into the questions. I've got a list of questions. I want to get right up close and personal to answer them. So I've got a list of questions over here, and we're going to just go through them in order and provide all the answers that as you've been watching my videos, you've been thinking, and then fill in these questions. Now you're going to get the answers. So first question, it comes from Las Cruces 1971. Thanks as always for your support. I really appreciate it. And the question is, what is my opinion on signed comic books signature on the interior or the cover? Good question. My opinion on this has changed over the years. When I first got into comics, it was customary to have them signed on the inside. And then somewhere along the way, it became customary to have them signed on the outside. So most of my comics I have signed on the outside. But I'm leaning more these days towards getting them signed on the inside again. And it really depends for me on what the book is, what the importance of the book, the value of the book, but also the condition of the book. If a book is in low grade, having writing on the cover isn't going to affect the grade anyway. So you might as well have it on the front where you can see it. If something is in high grade, though, I would prefer to have it on the inside. There comes a certain point where you're treading the line between having a really cool signed something and having a really cool book that you just had someone write all over. That varies also depending on who's signing it and how they sign, because some people have particularly egregious signatures that can really mess up the way the book looks. So it's not even so much the aesthetics for me as it is the preservation. You know, as a comic book collector, I want to preserve the comics. I don't want to damage the comics. So that's basically how I've been going. If I have something that's rare or valuable or high grade these days, I tend to have them sign it on the inside. If it's low grade or doesn't have any particular value, then I'll have them sign it on the front cover so I can see it without opening the book. But it's sort of still evolving for me. I've just recently sort of started going back to having them sign inside the book. So thanks for the question. I really appreciate it. Next up, we have a series of questions from Anthony Perdue. He asked me a number of rhetorical questions, which I'm going to answer anyway, and then some actual questions. So let's do the rhetorical ones first. Am I familiar with the Silverage Leave It to Beaver TV show? Yes, when I was a child, in the 70s and early 80s, it was in heavy syndication. So there was a period when I was very young where I did watch that. Did I know that in the first season, a couple episodes, you can see him reading a Superboy comic book? No, I don't remember that. It's been 40 years since I watched the show, so did not realize that. Another rhetorical question. Did I know that Joan Alexander, who played Lois Lane on the Superman radio show, was a regular panelist on the 50s game show? The name's the same. This one I think I've actually heard before. I think I did know that. I don't know why. Did I know that the Phantom comic strip actually aided the war effort in Nazi-occupied Norway? That's another story that I have heard, although I had sort of forgotten about it before you mentioned it. So those are the rhetorical questions. But Anthony also had some actual questions for me. And here it is. This is a good one, too. In an interview, it's a long question, but the short version is Ken Quattro, the author of Invisible Men, the Trailblazing Black Artist comic books, says that following the Golden Age instead of the Atomic Age, the period of the 1950s should be referred to as the Television Age, since TV was a greater influence on comic books. He also suggested that Showcase number 4 shouldn't be hailed as the start of the Silver Age because the debut of the modern-day Flash didn't cause a flood of superhero titles to emerge. That didn't happen until Marvel reinvigorated the superhero genre. Do I agree or disagree, and why? So that's the first sort of two-part question. The answer is I basically disagree. But I'm going to break this down into two sections. So in terms of calling the 50s books, the pre-Silver Age, post-Golden Age, early to mid-50s books, in terms of calling them the Television Age instead of the Atomic Age, it doesn't really matter to me. It's kind of arbitrary. I think the important thing is to make a distinction between the books, the superhero genre, which really died off around 1947, but up through 1951, more and more superhero books were dying off, and they were being replaced by a whole new wave of titles and genres. We get the crime books, we get romance books and westerns, and all these other genres that are replacing superheroes. So you want to call it the TV age instead of the Atomic Age. To me, the title is a little bit arbitrary. I don't think there was ever really an implication that the title Atomic Age was referring to the influence of the atomic bomb. You could make that argument in terms of some of the sci-fi content being sort of like a fear reaction and stuff. That's really more prevalent in manga. But sorry for the throat clearing. It doesn't really matter to me. I see the argument. I don't necessarily know, as big an influence as television was on declining sales in comics, I don't know how much of an influence it had in terms of the genres or the books that were coming out. I think one thing that sort of I haven't really heard anyone talk about is simply that comic book readers were aging up. When by the time you get to the end of the superhero genre in 46, 47, 48, comics at that time, by 48 had the form had been around for 15 years. And so what you're seeing, I think, in the late 40s isn't just a post-war thing. It isn't just a shift because of changing society. I think you're also seeing a shift in the readership because you're getting a first generation of adult readers who grew up reading comics. People who were reading comics as kids in the 30s are now adults in the 40s, and they still love reading comics, but they are looking for more adult sort of material. So that's something that I don't think I've never really seen anyone discuss that, but I think it's another important factor. But sure, if you want to call it the TV age instead of the Atomic Age, it doesn't really matter. I just think as long as there's some sort of title, I don't think Golden Age fully encompasses what we see between like 47 and 55. As long as there's another designation for that period, it doesn't matter to me what it's called. So Television Age, sure, it's fine. On the other hand, when he's talking about the Silver Age, I disagree on a couple of different levels. First level is I think the basic premise is wrong, where he says the Flash didn't cause a flood of superhero titles. That didn't happen until Marvel reinvigorated the superhero genre. That's not really the case. Marvel was a competitor, sure, but there were other superhero books that came out even in the 50s. I think I've mentioned this in previous videos, but people forget that Archie Comics launched a line of superhero books in 1958 that was clearly influenced by the resurgence of superheroes at DC. And those books, that they only had a couple titles, but The Fly, for instance, that title lasted for almost 10 years through the Marvel age. And so, I mean, I just don't agree really with that, because we see um, not just Marvel bringing out superheroes as a response to the success of DC's superheroes, but we see other companies also doing the same thing. So on that level, I just disagree with that. But on a bigger level, I think that I just lost track of what I was going to say, and my computer keeps shutting down here. Um, I mean, it's basically saying that the Silver Age should be associated with Marvel, and I don't agree with that. I think the big shift takes place isn't actually from the debut of Flash either, though it's really the creation of the Comics Code in 1955, because that's what spurs the return of Flash. Is that all this serious stuff that was happening in the television age of comics, publishers can no longer really do a lot of that stuff because the Comics Code wouldn't allow them. It forced the comics to become simpler and cater to kids, because by becoming simpler, they were losing, like, automatically going to lose their adult audiences. And since DC already still had successful superhero titles like Superman and Batman, it made sense for them to sort of expand back into that area that could safely be aimed at kids. So to me, the start of the Silver Age is the code. Yes, there's books that sort of carry over into the code without a huge amount of change, and it takes a little while after the code kicks in for some of the lingering titles to die off. But you see a definite change in tone and content with the coming of the code that informs everything, including the return of the superhero books to the market. So no, I don't think the Silver Age is really should be associated with Marvel. I think that does is reductive, and it also makes things all about the superheroes when there are so many other popular genres at the time that were also affected by the Comics Code. So yeah, disagree. Thanks for the questions, Anthony. I appreciate it. Even the rhetorical questions, I appreciate the knowledge drop. So here's Metarog. Metarog's got a great question here. 2 questions. Which Silver Age DC character would be the best fit into a Silver Age Marvel team, and why? Conversely, which Silver Age Marvel character would fit into a Silver Age DC team, and why? I'm going to answer the second one first because I think it's the simplest one for me. A lot of the Marvel superheroes, when they first debuted, particularly the first batch I'm talking about in like 62, 63, were very simplistic. Particularly the ones that didn't have Kirby or Ditko associated with them. Some of them didn't even have Lee writing them. So if you read like early appearances of Thor, for instance, they're really bad. They're just like Superman stories. A little more interesting, but honestly not that much. They had a little bit of like soap opera drama, but not any more than you would see in an issue of Lois Lane. So Thor would be a good pick, but I think even a better pick, similarly uninspired DC style stories, would be Ant-Man. That would be my pick. If you look at Silver Age DC, the Atom has basically half of the powers of Ant-Man, because Ant-Man can do everything Atom can, except he's a better scientist and he can talk to ants. So Ant-Man is sort of a more interesting Atom, in my opinion, and he would very easily fit into the DC universe and slot right into the Justice League, particularly if we're talking about Ant-Man before the Wasp. Once you bring in the Wasp in issue 44, the Wasp is much more interesting, than Hank Pym, but it also adds a bunch of interesting things to Hank Pym because it's also in that issue 44 where we get Hank Pym's tragic backstory about his wife being murdered, and it basically brings in some of his mental health issues. Like a lot of stuff is built off of that story that introduces the Wasp in issue 44. So if you take pre Tales to Astonish 44 Ant-Man and put him in the DC universe, perfect fit, and actually becomes more interesting than the Atom. So that's my answer. Now the other way is a lot trickier. Which Silver Age DC character would be the best fit into a Silver Age Marvel team, and why? It's an interesting question because the Marvel and the DC characters were built so differently. I'm not sure any of the Silver Age DC characters would fit easily into the Marvel universe. But I'm going to throw out a strange suggestion here, I guess, and that would be the Martian Manhunter. And the reason I say the Martian Manhunter is because in some ways his origin stuff, where he comes to Earth and then he's sort of stuck on Earth and he becomes this sort of undercover policeman figure. It has certain echoes with other Marvel characters. There's a certain amount of visually and with the whole like policeman aspect, it's reminiscent of the Golden Age Vision Arcus. But the sort of like the alien who's sort of trapped on Earth is very reminiscent of what they did with the Silver Surfer. So I think Martian Manhunter is a character that could fit into the Marvel universe with better writing that he would get from Stan Lee and whatever if you give Martian Manhunter to Jack Kirby with Stan Lee's scripting, I think you could get some really interesting stories, and he would be a really interesting character to sort of fit into the Avengers. So let's say Avengers 16, we get the Old Order changeth, and we're bringing in these reformed villains. Well, what if one of those is this misunderstood Martian who comes to Earth and doesn't understand Earth ways, and so the authorities panic and attack him, kind of like with the Hulk, for instance, assume he's a villain because he's this green shape-shifting alien thing that they don't understand. And here's where he gets his redemption. He joins the Avengers in Avengers 16. So that would be my pick. Martian Manhunter joining the Avengers. Done. Thank you very much, Metarog. I really want to read that storyline. It obviously would have changed Cap's kooky quartet into a quintet, and they would have had a lot more power. But anyway, thanks very much for that question. So, next question. Keith Ingebretson. I hope I said that correctly. Ingebretson. So, Keith, thank you very much. I noticed an AD&D player's handbook in your past videos. Do you still play AD&D? If so, how long have you played it for? Good question. I did have one of my haul videos where I showed when I got the first edition Dungeon Master's Guide and Player's Handbook. I got the two of them together. I also have a second edition Player's Handbook here somewhere from when I was playing back in college. The answer is, so I still play role-playing games. I haven't played Dungeons and Dragons specifically for a long time. I haven't played since second edition. When I play, we have a bunch of different systems that we've played in. I've played in like Castles and Crusades is one that we've done. I'm trying to think of some of the other ones. I've played with like the Call of Cthulhu system and Kobolds Ate My Baby and Paranoia, like all sorts of different gaming systems. Hex we played recently, like it's Journey to the Center of the Earth sort of thing. So I do have a gaming group and we play once in a while. We're actually right in the middle of a game right now, but a lot of different systems. Haven't played Dungeons and Dragons specifically in a long time. More likely to play some of the emulators that sort of give you the feel of the original game. And that's in part because, to answer your second question, how long have I played it for? I started playing in the summer of 1980, when I was 7 years old. Had some neighborhood kids that summer who had like a whole set of D&D. They had the regular D&D, the box sets, but they also had a bunch of the advanced Dungeons and Dragons, all like different source books and stuff like that. It's basically the reason I bought these first edition, is because that's what we had when I started playing in 1980. So I've been playing a long time. It's over 40 years now, off and on. In the early 80s, I would play by myself a lot because I didn't have anyone else really to play with. So I would buy modules and I would make up my own characters and just run myself through the adventures. And then in college, we played a lot. I had a regular group there. Since then, it's been more sporadic. There was a period of probably 10, 15 years I didn't play at all. But then about 10 years or so ago, I got back into it with some friends. So yeah, it's been a long time. Thanks very much for the question. I appreciate it. All right, let's see. Andrew Kai, thanks for the question. Andrew is asking me favorite Batman rogue and favorite Flash related character. It can be a hero or a villain. I'm going to have some blasphemy here, but I'm not a big fan of Batman or Flash. I guess I prefer Flash a little bit. But having said that, favorite Batman rogue, easily the Riddler. I'm a big fan of the Riddler. I like the Riddler a lot. I like the costume. I like the conceit. I'm not a fan of the Joker. There was a time where I liked the Joker, but he's so overdone and lends himself apparently to so many stories that I seriously dislike. That I just prefer the Riddler because he just seems like he's a more fun character. The Joker's a character that should be fun, you would think, but the Riddler's actually fun. So I like the Riddler a lot. Now, favorite Flash-related character. It can be a hero or a villain. My answer for this is actually the Reverse Flash. Not the second version and not like the one from the TV show, whatever. But the original Reverse Flash, and it's strictly because the name, but particularly the costume. I just love the reversed colors in the costume. The yellow costume with the red and the black. It looks so cool. And I just love the name Reverse Flash. It's so Silverage dorky, but I love it. I have some photos of me somewhere. I had a Reverse Flash shirt in the 90s that I got. I don't remember where I found it. And I used to wear all the time my Reverse Flash shirt in the 90s. No one had any idea what the hell that shirt was supposed to be. But I loved it. So those are my answers. Thanks very much for the question, Andrew. Next up, it is Charlie from Disney Nerd Herders. Hi, Charlie. Thanks for the support. Question regarding finding comics in the order they were meant to be read. How does someone figure out where to start when they want to start learning about a specific character or storyline? It is very hard for someone to know where to start and what's good and what's not good. Boy, you said a mouthful there. This is a great question, and I'm not 100% sure how to answer it. Because the comic companies have made it very difficult to figure this out, in part because of the constant like renumbering and rebooting. Like if someone told me to check out an issue of Avengers 3 or something, they're on like volume 8 or volume 9. I would have no idea which version they were talking about. And I guess my suggestion would be to start by looking at the trade collections, particularly the older material. In some cases, Marvel and DC have put out sort of like a best stories from this decade or the best stories with this character. Those would be good places to start to get a feel for what they consider to be the best of the character. So you can get an idea, like if you don't like that stuff, chances are you may not like the other stuff. And I guess just asking questions like this, like everybody that reads the different characters is going to have their own opinion about, where to start and what the best things are. But um, yeah, I wish I had a better answer for you. It's actually really difficult to figure out, but I think some of the trade collections are a good place to start, particularly if there's best of. Like for instance, not a superhero title, but Archie. When I got into Archie comics, because I read their best of Archie comics, 400-page collection, and that stuff was great, and it gave me a bunch of interesting starting points for different characters and titles. So yeah, that would be my suggestion. If you're looking to start like at the beginning of the different characters, the omnibuses are good places to start. Um, but yeah, sorry, I don't have a better answer for that. I wish there was a simple way to answer that, but Marvel and DC have made it kind of difficult to figure that out. Okay, next question. James Gallig goes, my question is, as a comic creator, who would you like to have worked with on one of your books? Any writer or artist? Thanks for the question, James. The answer is going to be Darwin Cook. There was a time whenever I would like work on ideas in my head or script things, I would imagine that Guy Davis was drawing them, and I love Guy Davis's work. But it's very, very different from Darwin Cook's. But Darwin Cook to me is sort of the absolute sort of platonic ideal for a comic book artist. Sort of my big three, I guess, are Harry Lucy, Alex Toth, and Darwin Cook. And to me, Darwin Cook is like a synthesis of Alex Toth and Harry Lucy. So he's got that cartoony aspect from the Lucy work, and he's got that black and white sort of light and shadow uh, economy of line that is so great from Toth. And he does both of those things. He can do works that are serious and action packed and compelling, but also cartoony at the same time. And he's basically the best as far as I'm concerned. So Darwin Cook would be my choice. If I could have had a Darwin Cook, work on Crime Busters, that would have been the best. So thanks for the question. I appreciate it. Silver Knight Kyle. Kyle, thanks as always for your support. I appreciate it. 2 questions. Favorite Avenger on the full-time roster from the first series. Also, favorite original series villain and why. Again, I'm going to answer the second one first because it's the easier of the two. Kang is my answer. Kang's my favorite villain in comics, period. I love Kang. I've always loved time travel stuff. So I just really dig his stories. It helps that he has been involved in many of the best Avengers storylines. So that helps a lot. He's had a lot of great stories. And some Kang stories that are a little bit more recent. They're over 20 years old now. But the Kang story in Avengers Forever with Kang's origin, fantastic. That's one of the best Kang stories ever by Kurt Busiek, writer. Then Kurt also did a different version of Kang in the Kang Dynasty storyline in Avengers Volume 2, numbers 41 to 56, I think. Might have been 55. Really, really long, epic storyline that almost seemed like an Elseworlds sort of thing, because the ramifications were so huge and went completely unmentioned in everyone else's comics, but it was happening in the Marvel Universe. If you haven't read that story, that deals with a much older Kang. So he's a very different place in his life, and he basically wins. He conquers the world. And the few Avengers who escape imprisonment and capture have to do like a guerrilla warfare to free the Earth and save it from Kang's tyranny. So those are great stories. I'm just a huge fan of Kang. Favorite Avenger on the full-time roster from the first series. to me, there's three Avengers. If you have these guys on the team, it's the Avengers. It doesn't matter who else is there, and that's Captain America, Hawkeye, and the Vision. So my answer ultimately is going to be a Vision. The Vision to me is sort of the heart of the series from when he first appears in issue 57 until he leaves in 211. And I'm just a huge fan of the Vision. Captain America is obviously great, um, but they took him out of the series several times because he had his own title. That made it so a lot of his character development was happening in his own book, and you got very little character stuff with Captain America. Hawkeye, is cornerstone of the book up until he left in issue 109. And then it was very sporadic after that. There were long, long periods where he wasn't in the book. And I wish he had been, because I think he's great. I particularly love him with the Vision, because they're so completely opposite personality-wise. But the fundamental Avenger for me is a Vision. So thanks for the question. There's my answer. All right, moving on up here. And question from Antoine Boulet. What's your favorite Archie Comics title and why? Again, there's actually an easy answer for this, which I think is going to surprise some people. I'll say a close runner-up is going to be the original Life with Archie series. Some of my favorite stuff, I like the long form stuff. I like seeing the characters in more serious adventure situations. The knock on that series is that it's extremely uneven. It ran for 286 issues, and there were different periods of the book. So the first 40 is sort of like long form adventure stuff and dramas. And then issues like 41 to 60 something are parodies, like TV and movie and pop culture parodies. I don't really care for those. Then it just becomes a regular gag strip with occasional serious stories, but up until about issue 100 or so, it's mostly just a gag strip. It might as well be an issue of laugh. It's not really until issue around 110 that it gets back to the serious long form story, and then from then up to about issue 200 is really sort of the meat of the series for me. That's where the best stuff comes in. And then after that, they start doing shorter stories and stuff. So love the series, but it's just very uneven. So favorite for me is Jughead, and specifically it's Jughead Volume 2. The run in particular that I love is writer Craig Boldman with art from Rex W. Lindsay. Just great from when they first team up, which I think is in issue 89, the first appearance of Trula Twist, which I've showed before, but I'm still here. We've got here's my original art for the cover of 91, third part of the Trula Twist storyline, and then. Or that was 90. Here's 91. It's the third part of the Trula Twist storyline. And then here's 89, the first appearance of Trula Twist. So you can see I'm a big fan of Trula Twist, but also just that those stories and the real frustrating thing for me, sorry for just showing my chair there for a few minutes, but the real frustrating thing for me is that when the series was canceled with issue 214, it was the best the series had been. There's a few issues in there that were also really good that were written by other people. Most of them have Rex W. Lindsay art throughout. But that run towards the end, especially like issues 200 to 214, is just like, it's great. It's just solid gold. I forget who the writer was, but the Jughead Jones Semi-Private Eye, a 4-part noir thing where he becomes a private detective who is investigating mysteries around Riverdale. Great. And then there's a 6-part story where he basically gets in an argument with his parents and moves out of the house, and then he's crashing at the houses of his friends as he's trying to find somewhere to live. Absolutely fantastic. The issue where he stays with Reggie is just all-time classic Jughead. So absolutely love that series. So Jughead Volume 2 is my answer. Tartan Phantom says, when are you going to do a channel episode dressed in Crimebuster Chuck Chandler cosplay? How about right now? Right now. Yes, this is wearing my Crimebuster cosplay outfit here, which I made by hand. Painted all the numbers and stuff on here. See if I'll tilt this down so you can get a look. So I got the C, and then got the 76 on the back. Got the shirt underneath. Now, of course, you specified when am I going to do the original costume, and that probably won't happen. The cape's easy enough. It's really the hockey pants. That's the hard part. But this is a super easy. It's one of the easiest characters to cosplay because it's just a shirt. He wears slacks and comfortable shoes with it, so it's not difficult to put together. Took me a couple hours of work to make the shirt so that it was up to snuff. But yeah, so I'm gonna do it right now. I'm gonna be in Crimebuster cosplay mode as we finish this out. Thanks for the questions, Tartan Phantom. Okay, question from Chuck Hensey. What are my favorite mod covers from the late 60s and early 70s? He's got 2 questions. Second question, do I have any issues of Bunny from Harvey Comics? I'll answer the second one first. I don't think I currently have any issues of Bunny. I've had issues of Bunny in the past. Bunny, if I'm not misremembering, I think that Bunny features some art by Sam Schwartz, who's the regular artist on Jughead at the time in the 60s. I am a fan of Sam Schwartz. He's not my favorite artist, but he's really good. So I have gotten issues of Bunny in the past, and I might be wrong about that. I might be thinking of Tippy Teen, actually, now that I think about it, that has the Sam Schwartz. But either way, I've had issues of both of those, but I don't think I currently have any. I think there is a Bunny cover that is mod, which may be why you asked both of those together. My favorite mod covers, the Always Elusive Falling in Love 99, which I still don't have, is sort of the big book I'm looking for my romance collection right now, and I've been looking for several years now. I haven't been able to find one. I'm a big fan of Josie number 34, which I do have somewhere. I'm afraid I wasn't able to find it in time to do the video, but it's around somewhere. Josie 34 is a really good one. There's one that's really obscure and extremely hard to find and very expensive that I would really like to have in my collection. It is from 1967. It's called Mod Love. It's a magazine-sized comic book that was done as like a indie publishing venture. From 1967, it had a 50-cent cover price, which is really expensive for the time. It's got a fantastic mod cover, and as the title indicates, it's sort of a modern romance. I haven't really read anything about the influence on it, but it seems to me to be clearly been influential in terms of the romance comic. You start to see a lot of that stuff, particularly at companies like Charlton, which are more loosey-goosey. They do have some mod flavored covers, but nothing borderline. Yeah, Mod Love 1967, very expensive because it's very hard to find. Romance collectors love it. That's always on my radar. It's technically not on my list because it's magazine size of my checklist of my top silver/bronze age books. Since it's not really a comic book format, even though it came out in 67, which would be considered Silver Age, I think it's clearly a Bronze Age book, but it's not really either of those things. It's its own thing that really identifies, I think, more with the indie comics and underground stuff. But really interesting book, Mod Love. Thanks for the questions, Chuck. Okay, MRP questions. Riddle me this. Which 3 public domain characters would you most like to feature in a Crimebuster story or in their own feature that I would write and or draw? Bonus, is there a character I would immediately snap up to use if they fell in the public domain but aren't? Currently, well, I mean, I'm using a lot of public domain characters in Crimebusters. Some of them are ones I'm completely redesigning, like Granny Gumshoe. Others are characters that I'm only kind of redesigning, like John Force Magic Agent. And there's others that I don't really have to do much work with, like Uncle Sam. Although, no spoilers, at some point we're going to get the origin of my version of Uncle Sam, and I have made some changes to it. So I'm redesigning all of them. And there's one I don't want to mention who is already in the book. Secret character we're going to find out more about later and discover who they are. But it's a good question. 3 public domain characters. Okay, so something I've been toying with, but I probably won't do because I don't want to poke the bear. And they do get litigious. And that is Archie Comics. A lot of their characters are technically in the public domain. Archie is actually technically in the public domain. Betty, Veronica, Jughead, they're all in the public domain because the original stories that they appeared in back in the 40s did not have the copyright renewed. So their stories up through, like, I don't know, 46 or 47, 1946 or 47, I think, are all public domain. So technically those characters are in the public domain. Once in a while you see people that use some of the other MLJ characters, some of the Archie characters that are also in the public domain. Madam Satan, who is in the Riverdale show, has appeared in other people's comics. But it gets to be a gray area because they, are continually in use. They're constantly doing updates of characters like the Shield and stuff like that. Those characters are in the public domain. You could use them, but then you start to get into trademark things, and it's sort of like, okay, technically, legally, I could use Archie and Jughead and the characters in an issue of Crimebusters, as long as I'm not, like, they're not on the cover, they're not being teased, I'm not using their names in the cover, avoiding all the trademark issues. Yeah, like those are ones. I'd say those are 3 public domain characters I would most like to feature in a Crimebusters story, but that I almost certainly won't. Jughead in particular, I'm a huge fan of Jughead. So he'd be good. So, is there a character I would immediately snap up to use if they fell into the public domain but aren't currently? That's actually a harder question because then I start to think, why would I be using them? Like, what would I actually be doing with the characters? A lot of characters are analogs that you could use. Like, yeah, I love Captain America, and it'd be cool to do a Captain America story. Do I need to have Steve Rogers, Captain America, in order to tell the same story that I would tell with a Captain America analog, like the Shield, like we were just talking about? I don't know. I don't think I would need him. I guess my answer is going to be Wonder Woman, because Wonder Woman, yes, you could do analogs, but Wonder Woman has a lot of very specific stuff to the character. Furthermore, it's a great character that has had, like, so many bad stories and badly written stories that I would love to do a Wonder Woman story my way. So if Wonder Woman is in the public domain, I would rather use Wonder Woman herself than an analog. I think that's my answer. It's kind of a basic answer, but there it is. Super Russ 9000 asked me, what inspired me to start my YouTube channel? There's a couple different answers to this. I had started the channel a couple years ago just as a place to hold my videos that I was doing for the Crimebusters. So, like, when I do a Kickstarter, I'll have, like, a Kickstarter intro video, and I just host it on here. And I got, like, 11 subscribers that are all friends and family members who are reading Crimebusters, but it wasn't really advertising. It wasn't what it is now. Last year, just before the pandemic started, I was on the CGC forums, and there's a guy um, who has a YouTube channel, and I don't know how you're supposed to say it. Drachner, it's Richard backwards, and he had posted a thing on the CGC forums with a link to his top 50 comics videos. Now, many years ago, I had done a recording where I went through my collection, and that was for insurance purposes, just to document what I had in case something happened to it. I would have, that documented. And so I thought, well, I haven't done that in a number of years. It was really fun to do, even though nobody watched it at the time. But it was, so I thought I could do this, I could have fun, and I could document my comics for, you know, um, these insurance purposes. So I decided to go ahead and make a video, top 50 videos in my comics in my collection, and I spent like 45 minutes telling all the stories behind them, which is what's fun for me. That's what the collecting's all about. And so, and then I posted it. I mainly posted it because Richard was like, hey everybody, what are your top 50? So I was like, here's mine. And then people started watching it, like random people. And so I really enjoyed making it, and then decided to make some more. And yeah, it's just become a really fun part of the hobby for me. Um, and I like showing off my collection, but talking about my collection, and going to stores, and like I like all doing all that sort of thing. It also is a cool place. I have a comic book podcast, so I can take the episodes from that and put them on here so people can watch them and not just listen to them. And I've discovered from that nobody wants to hear about John Sable on YouTube, but that's fine. I enjoy talking about John Sable, even if nobody else wants to watch those videos. I'm gonna keep putting them up. So, and it's also a great incentive for me to talk to more creators about the creative process, and a venue for me to share what I'm learning as I'm making these comics with other new creators and indie creators and self-published people who have the same questions that I've been having. So it's just turned into something really fun and unexpected. And the fact that I'm at 300 subscribers now is boggling to me, because I had no expectation that anybody was going to watch any of these. So thanks very much, Super Russ 9000, for watching, and for the question. Silver-haired Bronze Age Babe Comics, hello. How and why did I get interested in collecting romance books? Wow, good question. I wish I could answer it specifically, but honestly, it's been quite a while, and I don't remember exactly why. But the basic reason is I was tired of superhero books. Started getting into romance, picked up my first few romance books quite a long time ago, probably close to 20 years ago. I wasn't going to very many conventions at the time, but there was a period from around 2000 to about 2007 where I wasn't really into collecting. I would, or maybe 2006. I wasn't really into collecting. I was sort of buying stuff new and reading it, but I wasn't doing the back issue stuff anymore. And a lot of it had to do with just being really burnt out on superhero stuff. And I became more and more disenchanted with superhero books at the time. There's a lot of like, stuff like Civil War and Infinite Crisis, and like a lot of stuff that I really didn't sit well with me, and mainstream superhero books just weren't for me anymore. But I rediscovered my collection, which had been in storage for a number of years, which is another factor. And once I was able to get that out, like I rediscovered my love of comics at the same time that I was falling completely out of love with superhero books. And so that's when I started looking at other books, other types of books, and the romance ones. I've talked about this before, but when I was a kid growing up, we used to watch soap operas with my grandmother every afternoon, like after school. And I really liked the artwork. I also just enjoyed the campiness. And so, I always tell people with romance books, when they're good, they're good. And when they're bad, they're fantastic, because they can be they're so melodramatic and over the top and campy and ridiculous in a lot of the stories. And so, yes, they can get formulaic and boring, but usually it's somewhere they're either good or they're really bad, in which case I love them even more. So they're just very entertaining, and there's so much great artwork that over a period of a few years, I just started getting more and more into collecting that. And I'm at the point now where I don't buy any new superhero books. I hardly buy any new books at all, but I'm pretty much more or less done. Don't want to say I'm done with superheroes. It's more like superheroes are done with me. Once they canceled Squirrel Girl, that was sort of the last one for me. But there's the whole world of these romance books I can still find. So anyway, that was a long-winded answer, but all of my answers are long-winded. Thanks very much for asking. Joe47771 asks, what books would I recommend on the topic of comics and comic art? Also, what's in the box? Well, I don't want to spoil what's in the box, so I'm afraid I can't really answer that. Has to do with the 7 deadly sins, but I'm not going to say anything other than that. What books would I recommend on the topic of comics and comic art? Well, this is very basic, but Scott McCloud, Understanding Comics, is basically where I go. That to me is sort of the Bible for comics. Now there's other books. When I was a kid, I read How to Make Comics the Marvel Way, or How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way, John Buscema and Stan Lee, and I hated it because I didn't want to do circles and like ovals and stick figures and flesh things out. I wanted to just be like, here's Conan. I didn't want to go through all those steps to get to Conan. I was 11. But it's a great resource in terms of learning how to draw the superhero books the Marvel way, the Marvel house style. Will Eisner had a book about making comics that was very important and influential. But honestly, I would just I would go right to Understanding Comics from Scott McCloud and just start there. So thanks very much for the question. And we have one last question is from Anthony Purdue. Anthony asks, what incident prompted Norman Maurer to get into filmmaking? So, thanks for the question, Anthony. I have a suspicion that you already know the answer to this. And I'm not sure I know a specific incident that you're talking about. I do know a fair bit about Norman Maurer because I'm a huge fan of Norman Maurer. What I can tell the rest of you who don't know what I'm talking about is Norman Maurer was a comic book artist who worked at a number of companies, but mainly at Lev Gleason, and so he was the regular artist and crime buster in Boy Comics. So of course I'm a huge fan of Norman Maurer. I think he's vastly underrated. He was also best friends with Joe Kubert. He helped get Joe Kubert into doing Boy Comics again, the crime buster strip there, and they worked together a lot. And I think that that has something to do with the answer here. Important thing to know is that in 1949, I think it was in 49, Norman Maurer married Moe Howard's daughter. So he was Moe Howard from the Three Stooges. So Norman Maurer was Moe Howard's son-in-law. And my understanding of what happened is basically Norman Maurer was very smart and inventive, and he and Joe Kubert basically came up with the method for making 3D comics. They invented that. They did the whole thing. There's an issue of Alter Ego recently where they had some interviews and some stuff about Norman Maurer that got into the details of this. But the two of them figured out this 3D comic stuff. They kicked off this massive 3D comics craze, and all the companies were doing it. And this was mid-50s. This is like 53, I want to say. So it was right around the time where things are getting really dicey in comics, and with the Senate hearings. And so basically what happened is Bill Gaines, I should say, who was infamous, of course, for those hearings over at EC, he pulled a fast one, and he sort of Norman Maurer and Joe Kubert had based their method on a different, like some sort of breakthrough that someone had done. And so Bill Gaines went to the source, got like the patent or something from them, and then basically sued everybody who was going to be using, because he wanted to corner the market on the 3D comics, and that sort of forced them out of business, and they had like a big market crash. And at the time they were trying to put out some other 3D comics, and basically the first one sold incredibly well. Ones after that tanked, and so they lost their shirt. And so basically my understanding is that with that confluence of events and with the writing on the wall in terms of comic books in general, Norman Maurer was looking for something else. And he Mo Howard was in this movie in 1957. I forget what it was called, but it was a science fiction movie. It wasn't a Three Stooges movie. And he got Norman Maurer a gig, like a job on the set working on the film. And he did really, really well. And then that was sort of his gateway to become a producer and a writer and a filmmaker. And then he ended up being the manager for the Three Stooges. And, the Stooges had this big revival in the 60s. Norman Maurer was behind all of that. He would write a lot of their stuff and produce their movies and their TV shows and stuff like that. And he did a lot of stuff where he helped innovate some animation techniques. So anyway, that's my understanding of how Norman Maurer and how and why he ended up going into filmmaking. It's just, with the comics industry collapsing, but specifically kind of losing his shirt on the 3D stuff, partially because of the market collapse and partially because of some shady litigation from the people at EC. He ended up leaving comics and going into filmmaking. So that's, again, I don't know if that's the incident that you were referring to, but that's a little primer on Norman Maurer for everyone out there. Really underrated, great artist. Look him up. And that's it. So somehow, if you've managed to get this far through my rambling and ranting, we've gotten to the end of this. I want to thank everybody so much for subscribing, and start thinking of your next questions, because when we get to 400, we're going to be doing 400 questions, or however many you end up asking me, which will probably end up being like 20. But anyway, thanks again. Thanks so much. I really appreciate all your support, and I'll see you next time.